Hey guys, all right, so we're gonna get started then. Thank you for joining us. Hi everyone, I'm Cody. I'm a marketing specialist here at QNAP, and I'm here with our product manager, Deval.
Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about the drives that go in your NAS. We'll cover the different types of drives that can be installed on various QNAP models. We'll go over RAID arrays that you may want to consider for various use cases. And we'll talk about different ways in which you can deploy SSD storage on a QNAP NAS. And so, taking a look at the agenda here, we'll first go over the drives themselves and the NAS hardware, including the types of drives that you can use with the QNAP, some specific NAS models that will work with certain types of drives, as well as PCIe connections and how you can use them to expand the number of drives you install. Then we'll talk about drive management, including things like caching, tiering, storage pools, and RAID redundancy. After that, we'll have a live demo from Deval. And following the demo, we'll be joined by our guest Ryan from our partner Seagate to give us a look at some of the drives that are available on the market. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A time for any questions that you may have. And so one of the first steps in setting up a QNAP NAS is determining the drives that you need, as well as various NAS specifications. If you're just using the NAS for simple file sharing, then HDD drives may do the trick, and you may not need more advanced hardware such as powerful CPUs, large amounts of RAM, and high-speed connections. But if you're doing tasks that require more performance and more powerful drives, better NAS hardware may be necessary. So in this case, you'll want to make sure that your solution has no bottlenecks, which means high-speed drives, powerful CPU, high-speed connectivity. And if you have fast drives, but if you have a fast drive, but you only have a single gigabit LAN port to connect to the NAS, your overall throughput will be bottlenecked, right, by that single gigabit connection. For instance, if you have plans to edit high definition video directly off of the NAS, you'll be better served with a storage solution that provides very fast throughput. So HDD drives, however, do still provide both the highest capacity options available for NAS and the most cost-efficient storage in terms of cost terabyte. So this still makes HDDs a very common choice with NAS setups. And so QNAP provides a number of drive connection options. These include SATA HDDs, SATA SSDs, U.2 NVMe 2.5-inch SSDs, M.2 SATA SSDs, M.2 NVMe SSDs, and in some of our enterprise models, SAS HDDs as well. So the standard QNAP drive bays allow for either 3.5-inch SATA HDDs or 2.5-inch SATA SSDs. So you can fill your QNAP NAS with HDDs, SSDs, or both. On top of that, some models will include additional 2.5-inch only drive bays. This is ideal if you're looking for a solution with both HDD and SSD storage, because while you can accomplish this with a NAS composed of all 3.5-inch bays, this will be more space efficient. Among the 2.5-inch bays, some support SATA SSDs and others support U.2 NVMe SSDs. So you'll want to confirm that you get the NAS with whichever one you're looking for and then fill the NAS with the appropriate drives. And then there are M.2 slots on some models. These are small slots found on select NAS models. They're a great way to add a couple of SSDs for a cache or tier. Some models support SATA M.2s and others support NVMe M.2s. So what are the main differences between SSD and HDDs when it comes to NAS storage? First and foremost, the overall performance will be better with the SSD. obviously than an HDD drive. And this is especially the case with random reads and writes. So if you're moving a large file and the transfer is entirely sequential, the HDD will see less of a performance hit because it doesn't have to keep navigating to different places on the disk. But because SSD uses microchips rather than a spinning platter, this enables them to do pretty well for sequential writes, but not as well when there's lots of random files being accessed in different places on the drive. But still, SSDs will be faster ultimately regardless, and also can be set up in large RAID arrays as well as the HDDs. Also among HDDs, there are models that run at varying RPMs. Higher RPMs will give faster performance. Another consideration for some may be the noise level of the drives. While most home NAS will not make much noise, if you're aiming for a very quiet sound, SSD storage may be a bit quieter as it doesn't have all of the moving parts that the HDD has. SSDs also have fewer components that could get damaged and compromise the drive. However, there is a finite amount of reads and writes, and SSD will be able to perform over the course of its lifespan. But ultimately, both SSDs and HDDs are fairly reliable, but not so reliable that you shouldn't have sufficient backups and perhaps redundancy. So the SSDs that you may put in a NAS include SATA and NVMe. These are the interfaces by which the drives connect to the NAS. The NVMe protocol allows for more parallel requests, enabling NVMe SSDs to move data more efficiently than SATA drives, enabling them to give substantial performance boosts. SATA SSDs will still give a substantial advantage over HDDs in terms of speed and performance, but not to the degree that the NVMEs will. So here I wanted to show a few examples of NAS models and the drive availability. If you look at the TS932PX, this is a model that includes 5 standard 3.5-inch SATA drive bays with an additional 4 2.5-inch SATA drive bays, ideal for SSDs. What this form factor encourages you to do is to set up one RAID with 5 HDDs, probably in a RAID 5 or RAID 6, depending on the size of the drives and how essential it is to avoid a RAID failure. The larger the drives, the longer it will take for a RAID to rebuild, meaning that the chances of a second drive failure before the RAID is rebuilt would increase if your drives get bigger. And then you'd set up another RAID with the 4 2.5-inch SATA SSDs. So this type of solution provides a hybrid storage approach utilizing the cost efficiency and large capacity available with HDD storage while taking advantage of the high performance of SSD storage. Now, you can also do this by just getting a larger NAS with maybe 8 or 12 standard drive bays, but it's going to take up more space and often it will be more expensive, which makes this form factor of NAS a really great value. Next, we can take a look over at the TS-H973AX. We can see a similar form factor. However, in this model, 2 of the 2.5-inch drive bays are the SATA drive bays as in the other, but then 2 of them are actually U.2 NVMe drives. Now, if we look at our TVS 72XT series on the outside, it looks just like a 4, 6, or 8 bay standard 3.5-inch, depending on the model of how many bays it has. But in addition to its standard drive bays, it also includes 2 M.2 NVMe slots. And M.2 is a smaller form factor that is basically like a little chip that you can slide into one of the slots. And the NVMe drives are so fast that even just those 2 slots it can give you a lot, even just with those 2 slots. So that can really utilize the Thunderbolt 3 connection on that model and the 10 gig connection as well. Now, if we look over at the TS53D series models, these come out of the box with just the standard 3.5-inch drive bays, but they include a PCIe slot. And what that does is it allows you to add a PCIe card to the NAS, including PCIe cards that support M.2 SSDs. And so this gives the option for someone to add SSD storage via the PCIe slot. And something to consider with adding M.2 SSDs and PCIe cards is when you're adding an M.2 SSD to through a PCIe card is the generation and amount of lanes that are supported by the PCIe connection that you're using. If the generation is older and only has a few lanes, you could potentially see some bottleneck in terms of the performance. If you take a look at the table, you can see the theoretical max speed per lane with the various PCIe generations. You can see PCIe Gen 2 is 500 megabytes per second per lane, PCIe Gen 3 just under a gigabyte per second per lane, PCIe Gen 4 is just under 2 gigabytes per second per lane, and PCIe Gen 5 is just under 4 gigabytes per second per lane. So once you've chosen the NAS, you buy the NAS and the drives that you're going to install it with, you'll need to choose how to configure the NAS. One of the most fundamental choices in this process will be choosing a RAID. Many of you are probably already familiar with this, and we touched on it briefly before, but in case you aren't familiar, RAID arrays allow you to stripe your drives together as a single storage space. And when it does this, it includes built-in redundancy. So the RAID options for QNAP include RAID 0, which actually does not provide any redundancy, but provides better performance. And then a RAID 1, which mirrors the drives. RAID 10, which combines multiple RAID 1s in a RAID 0. RAID 5, which sets aside one drive for redundancy, RAID 6, which sets aside 2 drives for redundancy, RAID 50, which stripes multiple RAID 5s in a RAID 0, and RAID 60, which stripes multiple RAID 6s in a RAID 0. And the more drives in the RAID array, the better the potential performance. But also with more drives comes the potential for additional drives to fail. For smaller NAS solutions, a RAID 5 may suffice with deployments using many drives, especially large capacity drives. It may be wise to use RAID 6 or perhaps RAID 50 or 60. Just keep in mind that the more drives you have, the more chances there are for a drive failure, and the larger drives will take longer to rebuild in the event of a drive failure. It's always good to have additional redundancy in those circumstances. So QNAP actually allows you to create multiple RAID arrays in the same NAS, given you have enough drive slots. So this will most typically be used when you want to set up both HDD storage and SSD storage on the NAS. This can be a really smart way to go if you require high performance storage. In this case, you'll typically set up all of your HDDs in one RAID array and then set up your SSDs as another RAID array. But how this is done will vary depending on the role you want that array of SSDs to play in your storage. There are 3 options for this with a QNAP. So you can set up an entirely different storage pool with the SSDs. You can create a cache with the SSDs, or you can set up tiering with the SSDs. So when using SSD caching, data will be temporarily copied to the SSDs for quicker access. QNAP supports read-only, write-only, and read-write cache types. When using a read-only cache, data will be copied to the cache only after read requests. So if you are trying to access or download a file, that file will be copied to the cache for quicker access in the future. Write-only caching writes data to the SSD cache first and then flushes it to the regular HDD storage. And then read-write caching caches data to the SSD drives on both read and write requests. When selecting a RAID type for your SSD cache, it's especially important to choose a RAID with redundancy if you're using write-only or read-write, as a RAID failure in these configurations could result in data loss. Read-only is a little safer in this regard, since the only data that gets cached will also be on the main HDD storage. Another approach to hybrid HDD SSD NAS solution is auto-tiering. Auto-tiering will move data to the faster drives automatically on a scheduled basis, depending on how frequently certain data is accessed. This can be with HDDs and SSDs, and for some enterprise models that support SAS HDDs, it can also support SATA HDDs, SAS HDDs, and SSDs, putting hot data on the SSD storage, warm data on the SAS storage, and cold data on the HDD storage. Because tiering will actually move data to the faster drives and not just copy them, it is important to have your SSD tier set in a RAID with redundancy to help avoid losing data in the event of a drive failure. And the final option for setting up a hybrid HDD SSD QNAP NAS is to just have the SSD storage set up as an entirely separate storage pool with its own volumes. In this case, whenever you're working with files on the SSD volume, you know that you're using SSD storage the entire time from start to finish. So this would be the best performing configuration of the three overall, but it is limited in the amount of available storage space. If you're editing something off of the NAS, you can work on a project as large as the volume will allow. And then when you want to move on to another project, you could offload it onto the HDD volume. So this is a less automated way of doing things, but it also guarantees that you're always working off of SSD storage. This may be a good option if you have enough SSD storage to support the projects you're working on, and you don't mind offloading data from the SSD storage to the HDD storage manually. This configuration can also be useful for running certain apps that run better on SSD storage. For instance, if you're using the NAS as a Rune core, which is like it's a music interface, it's important to run that on SSD storage because it doesn't run very well on HDDs. So this configuration is how you do that. You're able to choose to load particular apps onto the SSD volume or HDD volume. So which should you choose? Well, caching can be a good option. To recap, if you want an automated solution that will start working right away and support you're working with many different files, tiering is useful if you know you'll be working with a set of files frequently for an extended period of time and you want an automated hybrid solution. Tiering will take a little while to move the data you need to the SSD storage because it takes time for that schedule to take place. A separate storage pool is a good option if you want to run certain apps entirely on SSD storage, or if you have enough SSD storage to support the projects you're working on in their entirety, and you don't mind manually moving projects that you're currently working on, or after you're done working on them, to the HDD storage. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Deval, and he's going to give us a demo and kind of show us what this can look like with a hands-on example.
Thank you very much, Cody. You guys can see the screen. All right, perfect. All right, good morning, everybody. Yeah, so for today's demo is going to be very simple. I'm just going to show you the different options that you have when you have a hybrid deployment like an HDD and SSD option. So the first thing I would like to go through is, as Cody mentioned, there are two options when you have SSDs and HDD. So first, again, you can create an SSD volume by itself. Right here, I have a TSH 973X. Now this is not running QTS Hero or QTS Hero. We have a different webinar, or actually a workshop that we did just in December or December of last year, that actually covers hybrid deployment for Hero models. So if you have a Hero model, then just look up our YouTube channel and then just look up understand and configure your NAS when you have a Hero operating system. What I'm going to cover today would be the QTS 5.0 firmware. So the QTS firmware. So if you have a hybrid deployment on QTS firmware, you can actually create. So right here, I have a disk. I have a NAS with. No, we have the regular hard drives, and then we have SSD disks. Now, if you want to create, so what I've done here is I've created a volume just for my hard drives. So here you can actually this will be your hard drive volume, hard drive storage pool, and then the other option. So here now you have multiple options, right? If you do install SSD drives, you can actually create another storage pool, and then just select your SSDs right here, and then select another RAID group, which is RAID 5, and that will be your SSD storage pool. So at this point, what you can do is when you create the storage pool for SSD, then you can manually control what data you store on SSD volume and what data you store on HDD volume. So right here, I have two different volume, on an SSD volume, on HDD volume. So whatever data you put on the SSD volume would be automatically would be would 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 respond faster because it has low latency, because those SSD drives would be faster speeds as well as low latency as well. So if you have applications that require high speed performance, examples would be um, like QBR Pro. A QBR Pro, the operating system, the actual application, we recommend that to be installed on an SSD volume. So when you install that on SSD volume, the metadata creation and all of that would happen faster. So you can actually install that on SSD volume. So right here, when you look up QBR Pro, you will have the option to select which volume it goes through, and you can select your SSD volume. So that QBR Pro will have the advantage of having SSD volume. And then what you can actually do is that because QBR Pro is a serverless recording application, you can install the application itself on SSD volume, but because it records a lot of cameras, you require higher capacity storage. So you can actually, inside QBR Pro, you can actually create a volume that resides in HDD volume. So your application runs faster because it's an SSD volume, but the recordings are going at a slower speed because you don't need recordings to go at a high speed space. You require high capacity for serverless applications. So you can store your data, your recordings from all your cameras into your hard drive location. So you can create a volume within your hard drive, and that's where you can actually store uh, your recordings. So that's one way to do it, right? You can manually control where it goes where. So you can actually create a storage pool for SSD right here that I've showed you, and you can have a separate storage pool that is stored for your hard drive. Now, because it's a manual process, you always have, because you'll have different folders, right? You will have an SSD folder, you have an HDD folder, and you have to control where it goes where. So if you don't want to do that, the other option that QNAP provides would be QTier. QTier allows you to, what QTier does is that QTier creates a single storage pool that combines your SSD and HDD. It looks like an icon that looks like this. So you can go to manage right here, and then QTier, and we can select QTier right here. What QTier does is that QTier will look at your data, and when you have so it will look at your data and it will see what data you actually use the most, and it will put that data in your hard drives, and then your SSD drives, and whatever data you use the least will be inside your HDD drives. The best example I can give you is for video editors. Now, video editors who are actually working on a single project for a longer period of time, they will get the highest advantage of using Q tiering, because when they're working on a project, the QNAP will put that project into SSD, provided your SSD can hold that much of data. My SSDs are 3.3 terabytes. So if my project is within the 3.3 or 3.13 terabyte of size, the whole project would be stored within the SSD volume. And then once I'm done with the project and I'm starting with another project, the QNAP will then see that, okay, you've finished working on this project. I'm going to put this data back into hard drive, and I'm going to start grabbing the second project and put that into SSD drives. And this happens automatically on a scheduled basis. So right here, you have tiering schedule. It's done automatically, or you can do manual scheduling as well. So and then you can do queue tiering on it, queue tiering on demand as well, which I'm going to show you as well. That's so you can control what queue tiering does. But yeah, queue tiering does, you can do it on scheduling, or you can do it automatically. So when it will look at your usage pattern, and if you're not using the NAS that much, QNAP will start moving around data, because it doesn't want to move data when you're actually using your NAS, because what happens is that then it will slow down your usage. So when the QNAP will look at your usage pattern, and it will then start moving data when the QNAP is not heavily being used, especially during night times or daytimes. Or you can just set your schedule by itself, saying that start moving data around that nighttime or or during daytime, or whatever you prefer. But yeah, that's where queue tiering. That's the advantage of having queue tier. Now, let's say if you want to start using now let's say you installed you already have a NAS with hard drives, right? Right here, I have a NAS which just hard drives. And then let's say if you install new SSD drives. So in this case, I've installed 4 new SSD drives that are not being used and are free. QNAP now allows you to do is you can now upgrade your storage pool into Q tier. So if you go to manage right here, um, give me 1 second, okay? Yeah. So what you can do is you can actually expand the storage pool. So you can actually yeah, sorry about that. So you can actually go to expand and click on upgrade to Q tier, and you can select your new SSD drives. And this allows you to do is now, once you select these drives will now be a part of the storage pool, and then it will combine the SSD, and it will look like this, where it will look at it will combine the SSD and HDD volume into a single storage pool, and then you can start using Q tier as well. You can actually also okay, and then also Q tiering on demand. What Q tiering on demand allows you to do is let's say you have a lot of data and you have a lot of shared folder, but not all the shared folders require them to be on SSD drives. For example, backup data. Backup data, you don't want that to be going into SSD drives. What you can do is Q tier on demand. You can actually control which data actually should go in Q tier, or which data you should exclude on Q tier. So my multimedia data, I would definitely want that to be going into SSD drives when I'm starting using the data. So I can actually enable this particular multimedia folder, and I can actually disable like stuff that I don't need to be on SSD drives. So my backup folder, my FTP folders, my public folder, my QMail agent, other data that I don't want the Q tier to be on, I can actually disable that. So now QNAP won't cache that data into SSD drives. So only the multimedia data will be actually copied into the SSD drives. This is a good way to control what data the QNAP should look into when doing Q tiering. So definitely you want to only put data that you actually need. The rest of the data should not be entered into SSD at all, especially backup data. Backup data, you don't want that to go into SSD drives, because those are slower. Those are not high speed data. Those are not considered as high speed data. Backups are slow speed data, so don't want that to be cached. But definitely you want to cache data such as if you're running VMs, or if you're running um, video editing softwares, if you're running photo editing softwares, if you're running some applications on your NAS, like container stations, virtualization station, you definitely want to ensure that those data will be cached into SSD drives. So that's one way to control. So that's queue tiering on demand. This will allow you to actually upgrade your data into queue tiering. So that's queue tiering. The other option, if you install SSD drives, is caching. Now, okay, so one major difference with queue tiering and caching is caching is similar technology, right? It will cache your data. It will cache your most used data into SSD drives. So whatever you're actually using, that will be cached into the QNAP. But one major difference between caching and queue tiering is when you're done using the NAS, the cached data will be flushed back into your hard drives. The SSDs are temporary storage. They're not permanent storage. They're just temporary storage. So when you stop using a NAS, the QNAP will flush the data back into the hard drive. Whereas QTier, even if you stop using data, if you reboot your NAS, if you do anything, if you shut down your NAS, the SSDs are considered as permanent storage. So whatever you're actually using, that let's say for example, if you're doing a video editing session, and let's say you're done for the day and you shut down your NAS and you're gonna start the next day, that data will stay inside the SSD drive. It's not gonna flush back into hard drive. It's gonna stay in the SSD drive. So that's the reason when you look at the capacity for storage pool, it will actually always add the capacity for your regular hard drive plus the SSD drives. So right here I have 16.35 terabyte of regular storage and then 3.13 terabytes of SSD storage. So my total capacity for my storage pool is going to be considered as 9.47 terabyte. So with 19.47 terabyte, because it's going to add up both the capacity, because remember SSD is considered as permanent storage in Q tier. But when you're looking at caching is not considered as permanent storage. It's considered as temporary storage. So when you select all your drives and you're gonna add that, it's not gonna add that capacity into your hard drive, into your storage pool. The storage pool always going to remain as 21.80 terabyte. So just one major difference between that. So use cases, why you should consider caching versus queue tiering. So I already gave example of queue tiering, right? If you plan to use the same data over and over again for a few days, then queue tiering would be a good advantage for you. Again, I have to come back to the same example because that's the simplest example I can give you. Video editors, right? Video editors may work on a project for many days, so they can actually get the best advantage of queue tiering because that the project they're currently working on will remain in SSD drive, and then when they start on the next project, they will start the QNAP will then put that data back into hard drive and then put the new project into the SSDs. But caching for users who are actually using more temporary data or data that they actually that they move they move through the data very quickly. For example, photo editors or virtualization storage or again database applications. Those applications are very random, right? They're not first of all they grab data or they grab data in a random process, right? And it's not always the same data that they actually use. They're going to be using other data as well. So when you have more random data, then caching would be a better advantage for you because caching is going to grab the most used data immediately from the hard drive, is going to put that into SSD when you're actually using the data. And when you stop using the data, it's going to put back into the SSD immediately. It's not going to wait for it doesn't wait for flushing. So it doesn't wait for any schedule. It always happens live. So when you start using the data, it's going to put back data into SSD and immediately put that data back when you stop using the drive. So when you reboot your NAS, when you shut down your NAS, the SSD is always empty. So remember that. So let's set up a caching procedure, right? When you set up caching, you have different options with QTS. We have read only, read in write, and write only. So read only means basically the QNAP will just would put data that you actually it's gonna when you write something, it actually writes directly on the hard drive, when you're actually reading data, it's going to put that data into hard drive, into the SSD, and you can start reading the data from the SSD drive. So it's going to be much, when you're reading data, it's going to be much faster. So, or you can do read and write cache. With read and write cache, it allows you to, when you write data into your QNAP, it's going to put that data into SSD, and then that data then goes to hard drive. So when you write something into your hard drives or into the QNAP, it's much faster. Whereas when you read something, it's also going to be doing the reading as well. So video editors that or applications like virtualization application, when you have a lot of database application, when you have a lot of read and writes, then you want to set up read and write cache. And you also have the option to write only cache. Now, these are only certain applications that require write only cache, where when you're only writing data into QNAP and there's no reading going on. So when you're writing data into the QNAP, it's going to write that data into SSD, and then it's going to copy that data into hard drive afterwards. So when you do read only, you have the option to select read RAID 0, because remember, when you're reading something, there's always copy into your hard drive. So even if you lose any drives, or if you lose your SSD volume completely, your data is always going to be safe, because there's always another copy into the hard drive, because it's only read-only cache. So it's much safer to do RAID 0, because that gives you the maximum performance. Read and write cache, because you're writing data into the NAS, and that data may not have been written into the hard drive. You want to have some redundancy, so you can actually go with RAID 10. That gives you the backs. You require 4 disk minimum. That gives you the best performance. You can also go with RAID 5 if you have 3 drives. If you have only 2 drives, then RAID 1 would be a good option. Same goes for write cache. When you do any type of write caching, you always want to make sure that you have some kind of redundancy. RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 10 is the best option to select. Never go with RAID 0, because when you're writing something and one of your drive goes bad, that data that you have written, the temporary data, can be lost. So you may have some kind of data loss as well. So once you select the cache type and the RAID type, you select next, and then here you have the cache mode. So cache mode allows you to do is, there are 2 types of caching here. You have the random IO and then all IO. So the examples are right in front of the screen. So if you have random IO, is users who use the NAS for virtualization applications or database applications. If they're running a lot of VMs using VMware, Hyper-V, or even if they're using virtualization station on the QNAP, because those are always random blocks of data that the QNAP that virtualization requires. Even database application, a very small size of different blocks that database applications requires, then random IO is the one that you want to select. So that will give you the best performance out of your caching. All IO means that for applications for file server for daily use, like if you have an office for that users using for a lot of file serving applications, like just using in your office is just sitting as a file server. A lot of users just opening Excel files, or just opening some certain document files, or storing as backup data. Just a backup NAS. That will be a good option for all IO. Also for media streaming as well, for video editors, for media streaming, like Plex servers, all IO is also recommended for those users as well, because everything will be cached no matter what you're using and what you're not using. So those are the 2 applications that so those are the simple 2 applications. And then under random IO, there's also bypass blocks. So anything larger than 1 megabyte will be ignored and would not be cached. And you can control that, because remember, virtualization and database applications are very small blocks of applications. So you can actually go down all the way to 256. If you don't want to cache large blocks into the QNAP, into your SSD to save your SSD space, then you can select lower space, but default is 1 megabyte. That should give you the best performance out of caching when you select random IO. And then when you hit next, let me go to the other NAS because it has more data. So if you select caching right here, I have 2 M.2s. So with NASs that M.2, after this particular webinar, if you do plan to use M.2s, or if you do plan to purchase M.2 and add that into your NAS, this is a good webinar to look into to what gives you the best performance. So once you have done that, once you've selected the right one, you can actually select which volume you want to cache. If you have multiple volumes, you can actually ask the NAS to not cache certain volumes completely, or even if you have multiple I2C LUNs, you can actually ignore some I2C LUNs if you don't want them to be cached. Once you select that, hit next and hit create. Hit I understand, okay, and that will start caching the data onto the QNAP itself. So yeah, so those are the two applications that that gives you the best performance, or covers the best applications for caching itself. Actually, that is it for today's demo. Before we go to Q&A, I want to hand it over to Ryan from Seagate for his information.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, appreciate it. My name's Ryan Dumas, and I am the account manager for NAS and gaming here at Seagate. And QNAP's one of, well, they are my closest account and partner. So if you're not familiar with Seagate, we've been making storage for over 40 years. If there's a particular storage need, we definitely have the solution for it. We have a full portfolio of products, including our Iron Wolf product line, which is most pertinent for the QNAP systems. Oh, whoops, sorry. Having a little bit of technical issues with my. So yeah, so our Iron Wolf product, it's purpose-built for NAS. We have, for hard drives, we have our Iron Wolf, which is more consumer, prosumer focused. It's good for a NAS system up to 8 bays. And then if you have a larger NAS, our Iron Wolf Pro is good up to 24 bays. And then to go along with that, we have a full portfolio of SATA and M.2 SSDs for that tiering caching, or even all flash array. One thing to note on our hard drives, we're currently scale up to 18 terabytes, and we have 20 terabytes coming very soon. And on the SSDs, we go up to 4 terabytes. So, you know, the Iron Wolf products are all super reliable, up to 30 terabyte year writes. You know, we put a bunch of technology in them, like RV sensors, that make them ready to use in a QNAP system right out of the box, and super scalable. Like I said, we're currently at 18 terabytes, and very soon you'll see our 20 terabyte drives available. One thing that's unique, and you can only get that with Seagate, and we just added as a free feature for all of our Iron Wolf Pro product line, is Rescue. And Rescue, think of it as kind of insurance for your hard drive. In the unlikely scenario that you had a multi-drive failure in a NAS, ordinarily you would have to pay, you know, what could be thousands of dollars to go in and pull the data off your drive so you don't lose it. And we just give you that insurance for free. So it's just one extra thing. It isn't something you would use very frequently, but we're going to give it to you as a feature for free. And then we also have a full line of enterprise products. So that's our Exos series. And we have SAS and SATA HDDs that go up to 18 terabytes. And again, those will also have 20 terabytes available soon. And then we also have SATA and SAS enterprise class SSDs to use in QNAP NAS systems. And with that, I will leave you with, you know, if you feel free to, you can go up and sign up on our portal if you want to get more information on any of these products. We have trainings and marketing collateral, anything that you should need. And to get there, it's just seagate.com/partners.
All right, let's get started with the Q&A. So that was the Q&A specific for Seagate. But if you guys have further questions, just keep sending up in the chat or the Q&A section while I start with the section the Q&A we have before. So the first Q&A we had was any issues replacing our old spinning disks with SSD or disks with SSD on a TVS 872XU and other NAS units like that. So if you have a current unit that is all spinning hard drives and you want to replace them with SSDs, you can actually do that one at a time. So you can replace the first drive with SSD drive, the second drive with SSD drive, third drive with SSD drive. The only thing you have to remember is that the capacity, if you want to keep your data intact, then the capacity for the SSD has to be larger or same or larger than the current hard drive. So the current hard drives are 2 terabyte, the SSD has to be 2 terabyte and above. And then also you have the other thing you have to note is that once all the drives are replaced, only then you will get the benefits of SSD drives like better performance or low latency. But let's say if you have 8 drives, 872XT has 8 drives. So if you have 8 hard drives and you just replace 1 or 2 of them with SSDs, it's not going to give you that much of a benefit. Even if you replace all 7 of them and then 1 of them is hard drive, and it's in the same RAID group, it's not going to give you any benefits. Only once you replace all the drives in the same RAID group or all the 8 drives in the storage pool to SSD drives, that's when you're going to be starting, or that's going to be looking at more advantage of having SSD drives. Hopefully that answers that question. The second question is, does QNAP have NAS? Does QNAP have NAS units with 2.5-inch hard drives? Again, so we do have NASs that are 3.5-inch that actually supports 2.5-inch hard drives. So the tray itself is 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch, and also SSD, which is also 2.5-inch size. So the hard drive trays are compatible with them. We have specific NASs that like HH264 that is only 2.5-inch. There are smaller NAS or silent NAS, we call it as. It's only 2.5-inch size as well. We have NASs that are hybrid, which are 3.5-inch dedicated drives and then 2.5-inch dedicated drives. That is like the TSH973AX. So we have a lot of options for 2.5-inch size as well. Another question we have is, what do you recommend for economical NAS for 3.5-inch hard drive for a capacity in range of 24 to 32 capacity drives? Probably RAID 5. Can the NAS be connected to both a PC and a local Ethernet network? And is this advisable? And what is the best way to connect the NAS directly to PC? So for direct connection to PC, we only have Thunderbolt options. So if you have a few NAS that is Thunderbolt compatible, so you can connect that directly to a computer, and then that NAS also has a network port that can be connected to your network, so it can be in your network as well as directly connected to your computer. So TVS 872XT or TVS 672XT or 472XT, those are all NAS that are Thunderbolt compatible that be connected to the PC directly. Now, is this advisable? Now, advisable as now it's not recommended. Only certain NAS that require Thunderbolt connectivity. If your computer have Thunderbolt port, then yes, those NAS can be a good advantage. That can give you a good advantage having a direct connection. But if you're using it for just regular purpose like file server, backup server, or Plex media streaming as well, or just basic media streaming as well, then you don't need direct connection. It should be fine going through a network itself. If you have specific applications like the Final Cut Pro or video editing, so Thunderbolt may give you a better advantage. Of having a direct connection will also give you a better advantage as well. Another question was, what operating system are we using on this demo? It was 5.0.0. Another question is, what about ECC memory and ZFS? So ECC and ZFS is recommended. So we have all of our ZFS, or most of our ZFS does come with ECC support. So it should be fine as well. Another question is, any of your NAS can support MS Hyper-V NAS storage? So QNAP supports iSCSI. If you have a computer Windows server that supports that has Hyper-V installed, you can actually connect your NAS via iSCSI, and then you can connect that iSCSI to your Hyper-V, and then you can start running VMs off of that. We have many users that actually use this particular feature, and they work fine. So all you have to remember is that your Windows server can connect to your QNAP via iSCSI protocol, So iSCSI will give you a blocks, raw block storage, and you can run your VMs on top of that iSCSI itself. Keith has another question. Are there any benefits of using SSD instead of HDD as a boot volume? No. So on QNAP NAS, there's no QNAP NAS internally doesn't have any specific boot volume itself. So especially for QTS, does there's no advantage of having your SSD as a boot volume. So I wouldn't recommend that. The only recommendation is because the boot time is going to always remain same no matter if you have HDD SSD. But applications, if you have certain applications that require, you can, so QNAP now gives you the option to install applications on certain volumes, like as I mentioned, QVR Pro, Rune Server. Those can be installed on SSD, so you can control using that instead of boot volume itself. Do your 2.5 consumer external HDD degrade by not used for a long time? Example, several years. So I think this is a good question for Ryan.
Sorry, I missed the last part of it. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the customer has a question saying that does your 2.5-inch or any hard drive degrade when not being used over a long time? For example, several months or several years.
No, that wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah. So that shouldn't be an issue if you're not using. Go ahead.
While we're talking 2.5s, we don't have Iron Wolf 2.5-inch spinning drives. So in that case, you would want to use our Exos SATA drives. You wouldn't want to put like a Barracuda that's built for client. It's just those drives aren't going to pair well in an array. Just FYI.
All right, perfect. We have another question for Seagate. Which Seagate recommended for write cache? Or which Seagate SSD is recommended for write cache?
So yeah, we have specific Iron Wolf drives for NAS, but you could use, if you're just going to use it for caching, you could use like one of our FireCuda drives that's sort of built for gaming. It would work fine for caching.
Perfect.
But the difference would be the endurance on our Iron Wolf series is going to be higher for sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Another question for QNAP would be, are there benefits of using, so we covered that one. Any limitations for SSD for cache drives or pools, for example, SSD size or pool size? So yes, there is a limitation of how large can you set up your SSD caching. The maximum size is 4 terabyte on SSD volume. It's so SSD caching. There's no limitation of how large its volume would be, but the maximum SSD caching is 4 terabytes. Another question is for Thunderbolt NAS. Do you still recommend SMB or AFP? Yes, actually SMB is now recommended for Thunderbolt for connection using Apple computers because SMB now gives you better performance as well as I think Apple also recommends using SMB because AFP is no longer being I think developed. I'm not really sure, but SMB is still recommended for Thunderbolt connection as well as regular NAS connection as well. I'm not sure if Ryan can help answer this, but the question again goes back to the hard drives not being used. The customer or the user asking about specifically for external hard drives. If the external hard drives are not being used for many years, a month, does that cause any problem?
No, so talking about like attaching an external drive,
a USB 2.5.
Yeah. No, you can leave one of the drives sit, and like I have archive drives that I've had for many years, and I only touch them once or twice a year. Not an issue.
Perfect, thank you. And that's all the questions currently we have on the Q&A section. But if you guys have any further questions, yeah, there's another question: is a lifespan on a hard drive versus SSD? Brian, can you help answer this one?
Yeah, they're both, when you talk about the Iron Wolf and our Exos, if you go into that partner portal, you can look at the actual mean time before failure for SSD or for hard drives, and then for SSDs, it's total bytes written. There's just a finite amount of writes you can make, but both are super high endurance. The Iron Wolves carry a 3-year warranty, Iron Wolf Pro 5, Exos 5-year warranty, and usually they're going to last much longer than the warranty.
All right. And another question from John. He's using a 4 terabyte external hard drive for archival storage, which is a 2.5-inch external USB hard drive storage. And he's concerned about having the hard drives powered down and not being used for a long time. Is it good? Should these HDD be periodically spun or and exercised? So no, so for those drives, you don't need to turn them on or exercise these drives. If especially when you're using for archival purposes, those drives can just sitting there, not connected, and that shouldn't cause any kind of problem, especially for hard drives as well. So hard drives that shouldn't cause any kind of problems if you're not exercising for several months or even years. That should not cause any problems or data loss into your hard drives.
Exactly, yeah. Like I said, I have drives that sit in my drawer that I touch. One of them I touch about every 2 years. Not a problem.
Perfect. So another question is, in a RAID 5 set, what is the probability of second drive failure before rebuild completes during a drive failure? Is RAID 6 useful and common? So that's a hard to predict question, because especially when you have drives that you have installed together at the same time when you're building up a NAS. When they're running for many years, we have customers running their NASs for 5 years and no drive failure. But what happens is that because they're all running together for 5 years and a drive fails, because when a drive fails and you replace the drive, what happens, the QNAP then spins up all the drives together because it needs to rebuild, right? When it does a rebuild, it actually spins up the drive at maximum speed to rebuild, and that process takes a long time. It can take over 6 to 7 to 8 hours. And when the drives are older drives, it's a good probability that another drive may end up being failed at the same time. So what our recommendation would be is for smaller capacity. It's like smaller drives, like 4 to 5 bay or 6 bay NASs, or actually 4 bay to 5 bay would be RAID 5, and anything about 6 to 8 bays and above would be RAID 6 is recommended, because RAID 6 gives you the ability to lose up to 2 drives at the same time. So that would be recommended for RAID 6. Is there a way to see the write counts or can be replaced before failure? So Tom, that's a great question. On our QNAP NASs, we now have the ability to provide you with more information about the SSD drive. Let me see if I can show you that screen quickly. So if you go to disk information, we have an estimated life remaining. So this combines information about write speed, write times, and everything to give you better information. So when it starts reaching at when the SSD gets older, or if you have a lot of writes, this percentage will start going down. So it gives you better information when you should replace the drive. And also under sorry about that, disk health. That also gives you better information about what's going on with your SSD as well. And especially with Seagate and QNAP, we have a partnership because we have a partnership and they provide us with the Iron Wolf Health Management. You can also provide that. That also gives you more information about your SSD as well as more information about what's going on with your SSD as well. And you can also look at smart information to get detailed information about what's going on with your SSD. hopefully that answers that question. Is there a specific OS version of QNAP that doesn't support SSD or minimum OS? No, our SSD, we are able to support SSD on a very older firmware version as well. I think starting from 4.0.0, that goes, I think that goes back all the way to 2014, 2013. So most of our OS version supports SSD drives. What is the largest commonly available SSD drives? So let's see. I think Ryan, do you know what's the maximum size we have currently?
For SSDs?
Mm-hmm.
For the Iron Wolf series, it would be up to 4 terabytes, and for our Exos SAS, we go up to 15 terabytes.
Perfect. Yeah, 4 and 15 terabyte.
And I'm actually 10 minutes late for another, so I've got to drop off. But
yeah, I think we're done with the Q&A anyway.
Okay.
Thank you for joining, Ryan.
Take care.
Take care. So, is there someone at QNAP can contact to discuss recommended configuration? Yeah, I'm gonna. So ussales@qnap.com. You can provide that information, and we can connect. We can connect there, and then you can provide us with your information about the configuration that you need, and we can always give you better. We can always help you connect that. I think that same email should work in Canada as well. Is there a way to determine when an SSD, especially one used at OS drive, is near the end? So yeah, it goes back to the same example I gave you before. The SSD lifespan doesn't matter if it's OS drive or regular drive. It should give you the information about SSD lifespan, and that should give you better information about that. So just keep track on the SSD lifespan under disk and virtual JBOD menu, and that will give you better information. All right, so we'll wait for a couple of more minutes before we disconnect. If you guys have any further questions, just send us that information. We'll be happy to answer that for you. All right, Cody, I think it's back to you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will be putting this up on our QNAP College YouTube channel, and when we send the webinar follow-up, we'll give you guys a link to that as well. And we'll be including a link to a survey, and and if you just fill out that survey, that will enter you in for a chance to win a 4 terabyte Iron Wolf drive from Seagate. So thank you again, and if you guys ever have any additional questions, you can always reach us at usasales@qnap.com, and we look forward to hearing from you. And until then, we'll see you next time. Thank you.